Officer Thomas Rourke believed he held every card that night. 15 years on the job had taught him that power belonged to the man with the badge, the gun, and the authority to decide who deserved help and who deserved a hard lesson. When he spotted the stranded black family on the shoulder of a treacherous stretch of highway in the freezing rain, he saw an opportunity to remind them of their place. He mocked the father's measured pleas, ignored the little girl shivering in the back seat, and drove away with a self-satisfied smirk curling his lip. What he did not know, what he could not have imagined, was that the calm, quiet man whose dignity he had tried to strip away carried a secret that would shatter Thomas Rourke's entire world. Some mistakes cost a man his badge. This one was about to cost him everything. The rain fell in sheets, hammering the windshield of the Ford Police Interceptor with such force that the wipers could barely keep up. It was a miserable Tuesday night in late October in northern Illinois, the kind of night that soaked through boots and settled deep into the bones. For Officer Thomas Rourke, a 42-year-old veteran of the Fairview Police Department's 12th Precinct, the storm was just one more insult in a long list of grievances he nursed against the world. Thomas was 20 pounds overweight and steeped in bitterness. 3 times in 5 years he had been passed over for promotion to sergeant. In his mind, the reason had nothing to do with the growing pile of civilian complaints, his documented anger issues, or his chronic refusal to follow protocol. No, Thomas blamed the system. He blamed the brass, the politicians, and above all, the department's new diversity initiatives. The world, as he saw it, was a strict hierarchy, and people who did not belong were being pushed up the ladder while men like him were shoved down. He cruised the desolate length of Illinois Route 114, a narrow, poorly lit highway that skirted the affluent, mostly white suburbs of Oak Brook. The road was notorious for its steep embankments and sudden drop-offs. Sensible drivers stayed off it in weather like this, but Thomas was finishing a brutal double shift on the outer perimeter, where the city bled into the county. Through the blur of rain and the rhythmic slap of the wipers, he spotted hazard lights blinking desperately on the narrow shoulder. He slowed, tires hissing on the slick asphalt. A late-model black Audi SUV sat tilted awkwardly, its front passenger side sagging from a blown tire. Annoyance curled in Thomas's gut. He did not want paperwork. He did not want to step out into the rain. He certainly did not want to play Good Samaritan. Protocol, however, demanded he check it out. He pulled in behind the Audi and activated his overhead lights. Red and blue strobes painted the dark highway in chaotic flashes. He ran the plates through the mobile data computer. Out of state. Illinois. A rental. Inside the Audi, Daniel Harrison released a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Thank God," he murmured, watching the flashing lights in the rearview mirror. "It's the police. We're going to be all right." Daniel was 48, tall and broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that had seen more of the world's hard edges than most. On ordinary days, he wore tailored suits. Tonight, he wore a simple gray university sweatshirt and jeans. It had been a long, exhausting drive from the airport. They had trusted the GPS when it suggested a shortcut to their new home in Fairview. That shortcut had led them onto this miserable stretch of road, just as a jagged piece of debris shredded their front tire. In the passenger seat, his wife, Rachel, pulled her cardigan tighter. "Are they getting out? It's freezing out there, Daniel." Lily is practically shaking. Their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, huddled under a travel blanket in the back. She had picked up a mild fever on the flight, and the sudden drop in temperature inside the dead car was not helping. The Audi's battery had inexplicably died minutes after they pulled over, leaving them without heat. To make matters worse, this particular hollow on Route 114 was a notorious dead zone for cell service. For the last 40 minutes, they had been invisible to the world. "He's running our plates," Daniel said, his deep voice steady and soothing. "Standard procedure. Let me do the talking. I'll get him to call a tow, and maybe we can sit in the back of his cruiser to warm up." Thomas grabbed his heavy maglite, shrugged into his weather-beaten rain slicker, and stepped out into the deluge. The cold rain bit instantly at his face. He slammed the cruiser door and walked toward the Audi, hand resting instinctively on his utility belt. As he approached the driver's side, he shone the blinding beam of the maglite directly into the side view mirror, deliberately making it impossible for the driver to see him. Intimidation, pure and simple. Daniel rolled down the window. The roar of the storm and the freezing wind rushed in. "Evening, officer," Daniel said, polite and respectful, raising a hand to shield his eyes. "I can't tell you how glad we are to see you. We hit some debris about a mile back, completely destroyed the tire, and then the car's electrical system just shut down. We're stranded." Thomas said nothing at first. He kept the light trained on Daniel's face, taking in the dark skin, the casual clothes, the expensive rental. He panned the beam to Rachel, who squinted against the glare, then swept it over the back seat, illuminating Lily's frightened face. In Thomas's mind, a familiar narrative was already forming. Expensive car, out-of-state plates, a black man at the wheel on the edge of Oak Brook. His biases, nurtured by years of unchecked cynicism, flared to life. "License and registration," he demanded, voice a flat, authoritative bark that cut through the rain. "Of course," Daniel said, moving his hands slowly and deliberately. "It's a rental, so the registration is in the glove box. My wallet is in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it now." "Just hand me the ID," Thomas snapped, shifting his stance. He did not like how calm the man was. Usually when he stopped people of color in this part of the county, they were nervous, agitated, eager to please. Daniel's measured demeanor felt like a challenge. Daniel handed over his Illinois driver's license. Thomas snatched it, wiped the rain off with his thumb, and read the name aloud with open skepticism. "Daniel Harrison. What brings you out to Fairview, Daniel? You're a long way from Chicago." "We're relocating here," Daniel explained, keeping his voice steady despite the freezing rain blowing onto his shoulder. "We just flew in. We were heading to our new house when the tire blew. Our phones don't have any signal out here. If you could radio dispatch for a tow truck, we would greatly appreciate it." "Relocating to Fairview?" Thomas leaned closer, the smell of stale tobacco and wet wool radiating off his uniform. "Is that right? Pretty expensive neighborhood for a guy who doesn't even know how to change a flat." Rachel shifted, maternal instincts flaring. "Officer, the rental company didn't provide a spare, and as my husband said, the battery is dead. Our daughter in the back has a fever, and it's freezing in here. Please, we just need a tow." Thomas swung the light directly into her eyes. "I'm talking to the driver, Mom. Keep your mouth shut." Daniel's jaw tightened. The easy cooperative posture vanished, replaced by a rigid stillness. When he spoke again, his voice was no longer merely polite. It was dangerously quiet. "My wife is just concerned about our child, officer. There is no need to speak to her that way. We are asking for basic roadside assistance." "What you're doing," Thomas sneered, leaning his heavy forearms on the window frame, "is impeding traffic on a state highway. You're a hazard." "We are pulled completely onto the shoulder," Daniel pointed out. "I decide what a hazard is." Thomas stepped back. "Stay put. Don't make any sudden movements." He marched back to his cruiser, sat behind the wheel while the rain drummed on the roof, and stared at the license. He ran the name through the national database. Completely clean. Not so much as a parking ticket. The fact irritated him further. He hated when the people he profiled refused to fit the boxes he had built for them. He keyed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo. I've got a disabled vehicle on Route 114 northbound shoulder near mile marker 12. "Copy, 4 Bravo," came the veteran dispatcher's voice. "Do you need a heavy wrecker or standard tow?" Thomas looked at the black family freezing in the dark. He thought about the man's calm arrogance, the way he looked at Thomas not with fear, but with quiet, observant intelligence. Thomas decided to teach him how things worked in Fairview. Negative dispatch. Occupants state they have a private tow on the way. I'm going to write them a citation for failure to maintain a safe vehicle and clear the scene. It's getting too hot out here. Copy that, 4 Bravo. Proceed with caution. Thomas printed a petty citation. Code 402. Obstructing a public roadway. A $200 fine. He grabbed his clipboard, stepped back into the storm, and returned to the Audi. He did not yet know that with every step he took in the rain, he was marching toward the destruction of his own career. He shoved the clipboard through the window. Sign the bottom. Daniel scanned the fine print in the dim light from the cruiser. You're giving me a ticket for a blowout. I'm giving you a citation for operating an unsafe vehicle and creating a hazard on a state highway, Thomas corrected, a malicious grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Sign it. It's not an admission of guilt, just an acknowledgement that you received it, unless you want me to arrest you for failure to comply. Your choice, Daniel. Officer, Rachel pleaded, voice trembling from the cold. Please look at my daughter. She's shivering. Just call the tow truck. You can give us 100 tickets. Just get us out of here. Thomas ignored her, eyes locked on Daniel. Tick-tock, Daniel. I've got real crimes to investigate tonight. Daniel took the cheap plastic pen. A lesser man might have snapped. Daniel Harrison possessed a profound, almost terrifying level of self-control. He signed his name with a steady hand. As he handed the clipboard back, he locked eyes with Thomas. For a brief second, the flashlight illuminated the silver name tag and the badge pinned above the heart. Officer T. Rourke, badge number 4092. Daniel committed both to memory. Are you going to dispatch that tow truck now, Officer Rourke? Thomas ripped the yellow carbon copy free and tossed it onto Daniel's lap. Like I said, I'm not your personal concierge. I don't operate a taxi service for people who don't know how to maintain a vehicle. You can walk up to the gas station at the Route 9 interchange. It's about 3 miles north. Maybe someone there can help you. Rachel gasped. 3 miles in this storm with a sick child? Are you insane? Thomas leaned in until his face was inches from the glass, breath fogging the window. I'm warning you, Mom. You raise your voice to me again, and you'll be spending the night in a holding cell while Child Services takes custody of your kid. Do we understand each other? Daniel's hand shot out, resting gently but firmly on his wife's knee. A silent command. Do not engage. We understand perfectly, Officer Rourke, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a low, resonant timbre that carried absolute authority. You have made your position very clear. We will handle it from here. Good boy, Thomas muttered, tapping the roof of the Audi mockingly with his flashlight. Welcome to Fairview. He turned his back on the stranded family, climbed into his cruiser, killed the overhead lights, and plunged the Audi back into absolute darkness. He threw the car into drive and pulled away, tires kicking up a wave of muddy water that slammed against the side of the disabled SUV. Inside the freezing Audi, there was silence for a moment, broken only by the relentless pounding of the rain. Then Lily began to cry softly in the back seat. Daddy, I'm cold. Why was that policeman so mean? Rachel unbuckled and scrambled into the back, wrapping her arms around her daughter, giving the child her own body heat. It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. Daniel, what do? We can't walk 3 miles. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The anger he had suppressed during the encounter was finally allowed to breathe, but it did not explode into rage. It hardened into something cold, sharp, and focused. He reached into the center console, pulled out a heavy wool sweater, and handed it back. Put this over her. We wait. I'll take the emergency flares from the trunk. Someone will stop. He just left us here, Rachel whispered, voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. He looked at a sick child in the freezing rain and he smiled as he drove away. Daniel, he knew exactly what he was doing. "I know," Daniel replied, zipping his jacket to his chin. "And I know exactly what he was doing too. He thought he was unaccountable. He thought we were nobody." He opened the door. "Lock it behind me." For the next 2 hours, the Harrison family endured a nightmare. Daniel stood by the side of the road, soaked to the bone, waving a red magnesium flare at the few cars that braved the storm. Most sped past, terrified of stopping on a dark highway. Finally, just past midnight, a massive 18-wheeler ground to a halt, air brakes hissing loudly in the rain. The driver, a burly bearded man named Hank Donovan, leaned out of his cab. "You folks all right?" "We need a tow," Daniel yelled over the storm, shivering violently. "And a ride to safety. My daughter is sick." Hank did not hesitate. "Get in the cab. I've got a heater that'll roast a turkey. We'll call a wrecker from my CB." By the time the family was safely inside the warm cabin, Daniel's phone finally found a sliver of signal while charging on the trucker's dashboard port. 13 missed calls, a barrage of text messages. The top one was from Mayor Richard Hayes. "Daniel, heard about the flight delay. Checking in. The press conference is set for 10 a.m. tomorrow. The department is a mess. We need you. See you in the morning." Daniel stared at the screen, the yellow traffic ticket still sitting on his lap. He thought about Officer Rourke's arrogant smirk. He thought about his daughter shivering in the dark. "Is everything all right, Daniel?" Rachel asked softly, holding Lily, who had finally fallen asleep in the warmth of the truck. Daniel looked out at the passing highway. "Everything is fine, Rachel. In fact, I think I'm going to be very busy tomorrow." The 12th precinct of the Fairview Police Department was a chaotic, aging brick building that smelled perpetually of cheap institutional floor wax, stale coffee, and old sweat. At 8 o'clock the next morning, the bullpen buzzed with electric, nervous energy. Rumors had swirled for weeks. The department was reeling from a massive federal probe that had exposed deep-rooted corruption, excessive use of force, and rampant racial profiling. The previous commissioner had been forced into early retirement to avoid indictment. In response, Mayor Hayes had promised the city a total overhaul. An outsider, a reformer who would not merely trim the branches of the department's toxic culture, but rip it out by the roots. Officer Thomas Rourke sat at his cluttered metal desk, nursing lukewarm coffee and typing reports from the previous night with 2 stiff fingers. He was exhausted, yet a strange sense of smug satisfaction lingered. The memory of the terrified black family in the Audi was a twisted little trophy he kept in the back of his mind. His partner, a younger, impressionable officer named Greg Henderson, leaned over the partition. "Rough night, Tommy." "Same old garbage, Greg." Thomas took a sip of the bitter coffee. "Handed out a few citations. Had some city slicker out on 114 trying to tell me how to do my job. His fancy SUV broke down. Guy thought because he drove an Audi, I was going to be his personal AAA service." Greg chuckled. "What did you do?" "Told him to start walking." Thomas smirked. "Slapped him with a 402 for blocking the roadway. You should have seen his face. These people come into our city thinking they run the place. Sometimes you just got to remind them who actually wears the badge." Before Greg could respond, the heavy wooden doors of the bullpen swung open and Captain Gregory Miller marched in. Miller was a stern, no-nonsense veteran who had survived the recent purges by keeping his head down. Today he looked pale, genuinely rattled. "Listen up. All available personnel, front and center, right now." Chairs scraped. Telephones were slammed down. Within seconds, 50 uniformed officers and plain-clothes detectives gathered in a loose semicircle around the captain's podium. Thomas dragged his feet and stood near the back, leaning against a filing cabinet with his arms crossed. "As you all know," Captain Miller began, voice echoing off the cinder block walls, "the mayor's office has been conducting a nationwide search for our new police commissioner. The announcement is being made to the press at City Hall in an hour, But the mayor and our new boss wanted to address the precincts directly first, starting with us. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Quiet. Miller's tone snapped like a whip. This department is on life support. The feds are watching us. The media is watching us. The public hates us. The man stepping into this role is not one of our own. He comes from outside. He spent 20 years in the Chicago Police Department, rose to deputy superintendent, and holds a law degree. He is a tactician, an enforcer of policy, and he does not play games. Thomas rolled his eyes and whispered to Greg, "Great, another suit with a law degree. Probably hasn't seen the street in 10 years. I want absolute professionalism," Miller continued, ignoring the whispers. "He's touring the precincts today to lay out his new zero-tolerance policy. He is in the building. Stand at attention." The room stiffened. Thomas lazily uncrossed his arms and stood up straight, though his face maintained a mask of bored indifference. The side door near the captain's office opened. Mayor Richard Hayes walked in first, flanked by two formidable security details. The mayor looked serious as he scanned the room of officers. "Good morning, 12th Precinct," Mayor Hayes said, stepping to the microphone. "I won't waste your time with a long speech. You know why we are here. Change is no longer optional in this city. It is mandatory. To lead that change, I have brought in a man of impeccable integrity, a man who understands the law, and more importantly, understands justice. I introduce your new police commissioner." The mayor stepped aside. From the shadows of the hallway, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped into the fluorescent light of the bullpen. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored dark navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a deep maroon tie. He carried himself with an aura of absolute command, posture perfect, gaze sharp and sweeping. It was Daniel Harrison. Thomas Rourke's breath caught in his throat. His heart skipped a beat, then began hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. No, Thomas thought, a cold sweat instantly breaking out on the back of his neck. No, that's impossible. Daniel stepped up to the podium. He placed a single manila folder on the wooden surface. He did not look at his notes. He did not look at the mayor. He simply let his eyes drift across the sea of blue uniforms. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. His hands began to tremble. He tried to shrink back behind Greg, tried to make himself invisible, but he was a large man, and the bullpen was brightly lit. Daniel's eyes swept the left side of the room, moved to the center, and then stopped. He locked eyes directly with Thomas, standing in the back row. The commissioner did not blink. He did not smile. The calm, unnerving stillness that Thomas had mocked just 10 hours earlier on a dark highway was now radiating from the podium. Only this time it was backed by the full power and authority of the Fairview Police Department. Daniel held Thomas's gaze for 5 agonizing seconds. To Thomas, it felt like a lifetime. In those 5 seconds, his entire career flashed before his eyes. Every corner cut, every complaint buried, every abuse of power. It all culminated in the yellow ticket he had thrown onto the lap of the man who now owned his professional soul. "Good morning, officers," Commissioner Daniel Harrison began, his deep voice commanding total silence. He did not break eye contact with Thomas. "My name is Daniel Harrison, and we have a lot of work to do." He finally looked away, letting his gaze sweep the rest of the room. Thomas felt his knees go weak. He gripped the edge of the metal filing cabinet to keep from collapsing. His mouth tasted like pennies and ash. "For too long," Daniel continued, tone conversational, yet laced with an undeniable edge. "This department has operated under the delusion that power is synonymous with immunity, that a badge is a shield against consequence. I have spent the last 3 weeks reviewing the internal data of the Fairview Police Department, the civilian complaints, the use of force reports, the disproportionate arrest rates in our minority neighborhoods." Captain Miller stood rigidly to the side, jaw clenched. The younger officers, like Greg Henderson, listened with wide eyes, sensing the tectonic shift happening beneath their feet. Trust is not usually destroyed in a single catastrophic event, Daniel said, voice dropping an octave, forcing the room to lean in. It is bled out. It is destroyed by 1,000 small cuts in the dark. It is destroyed when an officer decides that the people he has sworn to protect are his enemies. It is destroyed on quiet highways in the dead of night, when an officer thinks no one of consequence is watching. Thomas felt a cold bead of sweat track down his spine. The words were a targeted missile, invisible to the rest of the room, but detonating directly inside his chest. Effective immediately, Daniel announced, tapping the manila folder. The era of the warrior cop in Fairview is over. You are public servants. You will operate with a duty of care, or you will not operate at all. I have authorized a full independent audit of all civilian complaints filed in the last 5 years. Any officer found to have engaged in a pattern of biased policing, abuse of authority, or dereliction of duty will not just be fired. If the law permits, you will be prosecuted. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the bullpen. Even the mayor looked slightly taken aback by the sheer force of the commissioner's ultimatum. "Captain Miller," Daniel said, turning his head slightly. "Yes, sir. I will be using your office for the remainder of the morning. I want the shift logs and dash cam footage uploads from Sector 4 from last night brought to me immediately." "Right away, Commissioner." Daniel turned back to the crowd. "Dismissed." As the officers began to scatter, murmuring in hushed, anxious tones, Thomas practically sprinted toward the locker room. He pushed past a desk sergeant, nearly knocking over a stack of files, and burst through the swinging doors. The locker room was empty. He rushed to a sink, turned on the cold water, and splashed it violently onto his face. He stared at his reflection in the smudged mirror. Pale, bloodshot eyes, breathing like he had just run a marathon. "Think, Tommy, think," he muttered, gripping the porcelain edges of the sink. He pulled out his cell phone with trembling hands and dialed Arthur Jenkins, his union representative. Arthur was a bulldog, a man who had gotten Thomas out of 2 previous suspensions. "Jenkins," the gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Artie, it's Rourke. We have a massive problem." "Tommy, I'm watching the presser on TV right now. Your new boss is on a warpath. Just keep your head down today, all right? Don't give him any reason to look at you." "You don't understand," Thomas's voice cracked. "I pulled him over last night, the commissioner, on Route 114. A long, dead silence on the line. "You what?" "His car was broken down. It was a rental, out-of-state plates. I didn't know who he was, Artie. He didn't say anything." "What did you do, Tommy?" Arthur's voice was suddenly devoid of its usual bluster, completely flat. "Tell me exactly what you did." Thomas swallowed hard. I wrote him a 402, obstructing the roadway, and I left him there. His wife and kid were in the car. The kid was sick. I told them to walk to the gas station." Arthur exhaled a long, heavy breath that sounded like a death rattle for Thomas's career. "You left a stranded family in a winter storm with a sick kid because they were black and in Oak Brook." "I was following protocol for hazard management," Thomas lied, panic rising. "It's a state highway. I can't be a taxi service." "Save it for internal affairs, you idiot," Arthur snapped. "I can't protect you from this. If what you're telling me is true, he's not just going to fire you. He's going to make an example out of you. My advice, write your resignation letter right now. Put it on Miller's desk and walk out the door. Keep your pension before he finds a way to strip that from you too." "I have 15 years on the job," Thomas yelled, but the line was already dead. Arthur had hung up. Before Thomas could even process the betrayal, the locker room door swung open. Captain Miller stood there, looking at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Rourke," Miller said, voice hard. "The commissioner wants to see you, now." The walk from the locker room to the captain's office felt like a march to the gallows. Every eye in the bullpen was on Thomas. Whispers followed him like ghosts. What did Rourke do? Why is he being called in first? Captain Miller opened the frosted glass door to his own office and gestured for Thomas to enter. Miller stepped in behind him and closed the door, locking it with a sharp, final click. Daniel Harrison sat behind the captain's large oak desk. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle. Standing in the corner was a woman Thomas recognized immediately. Detective Natalie Brooks, head of the Internal Affairs Division. Thomas felt his stomach drop completely. IA was already here. "Have a seat, Officer Rourke," Daniel said. He did not look up. He was reading a file. "I prefer to stand, sir," Thomas said, trying to inject some of his usual bravado into his voice. It trembled pathetically. Daniel finally looked up. The coldness in his eyes was absolute. "That wasn't a request. Sit down." Thomas's legs gave out. He practically collapsed into the wooden chair opposite the desk. Daniel reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a crinkled yellow piece of paper. He slid it across the polished wood until it rested inches from Thomas's hands. The carbon copy of the Code 402 citation. "Do you recognize this, officer?" Thomas stared at his own messy handwriting. "Yes, sir. It's a citation I issued last night during my patrol. You issued it to a stranded motorist on Route 114 during a severe thunderstorm," Daniel stated flatly. "You then abandoned that motorist, his wife, and his 8-year-old daughter, who you were informed was ill, in a dead zone with no cellular service. Is that correct?" Thomas licked his dry lips. "Sir, with all due respect, I didn't know who you were. If I had known—" "Stop!" Daniel's voice cracked through the room like a whip. "That is precisely the issue, Rourke. You didn't know who I was. You thought I was nobody. You saw a black man in a broken-down car near an affluent neighborhood, and you made a calculation. You calculated that I had no power, no voice, and no recourse. You treated my family with cruelty not because of protocol, but because you believed you could get away with it." "I was following hazard protocols," Thomas protested, grasping at straws. "The vehicle was impeding the shoulder. I told dispatch—" "You told dispatch," Daniel interrupted, picking up a printed transcript, "that I had a private tow on the way. A direct lie. We pulled the audio from dispatch. We also pulled your cruiser's dash cam footage. Or, we tried to. Oddly enough, your dash cam was manually disabled 3 minutes before you initiated the traffic stop." Thomas froze. Disabling the camera was a severe violation, one he did routinely when he wanted to harass someone off the record. "However," Daniel continued, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the desk, "the Audi I rented was equipped with a 360-degree security camera system. It recorded everything. It recorded you blinding my wife with your flashlight. It recorded you threatening to have child services take my daughter if we asked for help again. It recorded you laughing as you drove away." Detective Brooks stepped forward from the corner. "Officer Rourke, disabling departmental recording equipment during a civilian encounter is a terminable offense on its own. But what happened next elevates this to a different level." Thomas looked wildly between Brooks and the commissioner. "What do you mean? You got out. You're here." Daniel's face hardened. A flash of genuine, terrifying anger broke through his calm veneer. "We got out because a truck driver named Hank Donovan stopped an hour later. He took us to Fairview General Hospital. My daughter's fever had spiked to 103 degrees. The doctors diagnosed her with early-stage pneumonia, severely exacerbated by prolonged exposure to freezing temperatures in a dead vehicle. You didn't just violate department policy, Rourke. You recklessly endangered the life of a child." Thomas felt the air leave his lungs. "Pneumonia. Sir, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know she was that sick." "You didn't care," Daniel corrected, voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You looked at a shivering 8-year-old girl, and you used her suffering to leverage your own pathetic sense of superiority." Thomas looked down at his hands. They were shaking violently. The walls were closing in. "Commissioner, please. I have 15 years on the force. I have a pension. Let me resign. I'll put my papers in right now. You'll never see me again." "You don't get to walk away quietly," Daniel said, standing. He towered over the desk. "You don't get to quietly retire with a pension funded by the very taxpayers you abuse." "Detective Brooks, what is the status of the investigation?" Brooks opened her tablet. "Based on the preliminary evidence, we are opening a full-scale internal affairs investigation into Officer Rourke's conduct over the last 5 years. We are reviewing every citation he has written, every arrest he has made, and every complaint that was mysteriously swept under the rug by previous leadership. Pending the results, we will refer the case to the district attorney for criminal charges regarding reckless endangerment and official misconduct." "No," Thomas gasped, tears of panic finally welling in his eyes. "No, you can't do this. You're ruining my life over one mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," Daniel said coldly. "It was a choice. And now you will face the consequences of that choice. Stand up, Rourke." Thomas slowly pushed himself out of the chair, legs feeling like lead. "Badge and gun," Daniel demanded, holding out his hand. "On the desk, right now." Thomas's trembling hands moved to his belt. He unholstered his Glock 19, cleared the chamber with clumsy fingers, and placed it heavily on the oak wood. Then he reached up to his chest and unpinned the silver shield that had been his entire identity for 15 years. Badge number 4092. He placed it next to the gun. "Captain Miller," Daniel said, not taking his eyes off Thomas. "Escort Mr. Rourke to his locker. Have him clear out his personal effects and then march him out the front doors of the precinct. He is permanently stripped of police powers, barred from all city properties, and his pension is frozen pending the outcome of the criminal probe." "Yes, sir." Miller grabbed Thomas firmly by the bicep. "Let's go, Tommy." As Miller pulled him toward the door, Thomas looked back at the commissioner. Daniel Harrison was already looking past him, sitting back down and opening the next file. Thomas Rourke was no longer a threat. He was just another problem the commissioner had successfully eradicated. The door opened, and Thomas was dragged out into the bullpen. Every officer was watching. The silence was deafening as the disgraced cop was marched through the very room he thought he ruled. His career, his freedom, and his pride completely destroyed. The walk from Captain Miller's office to the front doors of the 12th Precinct was the longest journey of Thomas Rourke's life. He carried a small cardboard box containing a few pathetic remnants of his 15-year career. A cracked coffee mug, a handful of pens, and a framed photograph of his police academy graduation class. As he moved through the bullpen, the silence was absolute. The men and women he had called brothers and sisters just hours ago would not even meet his eye. They stared at their monitors, examined their fingernails, or looked firmly at the floor. He was radioactive. When Thomas pushed through the heavy glass double doors and stepped out into the crisp autumn air, the reality of his situation violently crashed into him. He was a 42-year-old man with no college degree, a mortgage he could barely afford, and a skill set entirely tied to a badge he no longer possessed. Worse, he was facing the terrifying machinery of the justice system from the other side. Within 48 hours, Thomas's isolated nightmare became a very public spectacle. Commissioner Daniel Harrison was a man of his word. True to his promise of transparency, the department officially released the Audi's security footage to the local news networks. By Thursday evening, Thomas was sitting in his dim, messy living room, an untouched beer sweating on the coffee table, watching his own face on the 6 o'clock news. The footage was damning. The high-definition audio picked up his sneering threats, the cruel mockery, and the chilling sound of a child crying in the background. The anchorwoman's voice was laced with palpable disgust as she narrated the encounter. The public backlash was instantaneous and explosive. Protesters gathered outside the 12th Precinct, demanding criminal charges. The mayor's office was flooded with thousands of angry calls. Thomas's cell phone rang incessantly until he was forced to turn it off. He peeked through his living room blinds and saw a news van parked at the end of his street. He was a prisoner in his own home. Inside police headquarters, Detective Natalie Brooks and her internal affairs team were conducting an autopsy on Thomas's career. The commissioner's mandate had given IA teeth they had not possessed in decades. They tore through Thomas's old case files, cross-referencing his arrests with civilian complaints that had been previously dismissed by the old guard. What they found was not just a few mistakes. It was a staggering, systemic pattern of abuse. The breakthrough came on Friday morning. A 22-year-old college student named Jamal Reynolds walked into the precinct. 3 years earlier, Jamal had filed a complaint alleging that Officer Rourke had planted a bag of narcotics in his vehicle during a routine traffic stop, resulting in Jamal losing his college scholarship and spending 6 months in county jail before the charges were mysteriously dropped due to evidence mishandling. At the time, nobody believed Jamal. The department had buried the complaint, protecting their own. But Jamal had seen the news. He had seen the commissioner's face on television, promising that the era of cover-ups was over. Detective Brooks brought Jamal's case directly to Commissioner Harrison. Daniel sat in his office, reading the thick file, jaw tight. This was exactly what he had feared. Thomas Rourke was not an anomaly. He was a symptom of a diseased culture that had been allowed to fester for years. "Detective Brooks," Daniel said, closing the file, "contact the district attorney's office. We aren't just looking at reckless endangerment for my family anymore. We are looking at civil rights violations, perjury, and falsifying evidence. I want a grand jury convened by Monday." Meanwhile, Thomas was frantically trying to build a defense. He drove to the union headquarters, slipping in through a back alley to avoid the press. He barged into Arthur Jenkins's office, looking disheveled, eyes wild with panic. "Artie, you have to help me," Thomas pleaded, slamming his hands on the desk. "They're talking about grand juries on the news. They're digging into my old collars. You have to get the union lawyers to file an injunction." Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, folding his hands over his stomach. He looked at Thomas not with pity, but with cold, calculated detachment. "Tommy," Arthur sighed heavily, "I told you on the phone. You're done. I pay my union dues. You're obligated to provide me with legal counsel." "The union provides counsel for officers acting within the scope of their duties," Arthur replied smoothly. "Disabling a dash cam and abandoning a sick child on a highway falls outside that scope. Furthermore, IA just pulled the file on the Jamal Reynolds arrest. They found the discrepancies in your property vouchers. It's over, Tommy. The union board met this morning. We are officially severing ties with you. We cannot expend political capital defending the indefensible." Thomas stumbled backward, blood draining from his face. "You're throwing me to the wolves." "You threw yourself to the wolves," Arthur countered sharply. "You got arrogant. You thought the badge made you a king. Now you're going to find out what it's like to be a civilian in the system you helped corrupt. Leave my office, Mr. Rourke, before I call the police to have you trespassed." Thomas stumbled out into the alley, gasping for air. The protective bubble he had lived in for 15 years had burst. He was completely, utterly alone. And the wolves were closing in fast. 2 months later, the Fairview County Courthouse was a circus of reporters, cameras, and angry citizens. The trial of Thomas Rourke had become a national flashpoint, a symbol of a broken system finally being forced to correct itself. In the hospital, little Lily Harrison had made a full recovery. The pneumonia had been severe, requiring a week in the pediatric intensive care unit, but the resilience of youth and excellent medical care had pulled her through. Daniel and Rachel had taken turns sleeping in the uncomfortable vinyl chairs beside her bed, their bond strengthening in the crucible of their daughter's illness. Now Daniel sat in the front row of the courtroom, dressed in a crisp dark suit, holding Rachel's hand. He was not there in his official capacity as commissioner. He was there as a father and a victim. Across the aisle, Thomas Rourke sat at the defense table. The physical toll of the last 2 months was staggering. He had lost 20 pounds. His hair was thinning rapidly, and his skin had a gray, sickly pallor. Without the uniform, without the gun belt, he did not look intimidating. He looked small. He looked terrified. The district attorney, a sharp, relentless prosecutor named Helen Carter, had systematically dismantled Thomas's life over the course of the 3-day trial. She played the Audi's security footage. She brought Hank Donovan to the stand to testify about the freezing conditions and Lily's deteriorating health. She brought Jamal Reynolds to the stand, painting a devastating picture of an officer who routinely preyed on minorities and the vulnerable. But the final nail in the coffin came when the DA called Captain Miller to the stand. Under oath, Miller admitted that he had known about Thomas's aggressive tendencies, but had bowed to union pressure to keep him on the street. It was a stunning admission that not only sealed Thomas's fate, but accelerated Commissioner Harrison's purge of the department's complicit leadership. Judge Harold Davies, an imposing man with a reputation for zero tolerance regarding public corruption, looked down from the bench as the jury foreperson stood to read the verdict. On the charge of reckless endangerment in the first degree, the foreperson read, her voice echoing in the dead-silent courtroom. We find the defendant, Thomas Rourke, guilty. Thomas closed his eyes. A ragged breath escaped his lips. On the charge of official misconduct, guilty. On the charge of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, guilty. The gavel came down with a sharp, definitive crack. Judge Davies did not waste time scheduling a separate sentencing hearing. He looked directly at Thomas. Mr. Rourke, the judge rumbled, police officers are entrusted with an extraordinary amount of power. They are given the authority to deprive citizens of their liberty and, in extreme cases, their lives. You took that sacred trust and weaponized it for your own twisted amusement. You left a child to freeze because of your own bigotry. You ruined the lives of innocent young men to pad your arrest statistics. You are a disgrace to the badge you wore. Thomas kept his head down, tears finally spilling onto the mahogany table. I sentence you to serve 12 years in the state penitentiary, Judge Davies declared, with no possibility of parole for 8 years. Bail is revoked. Bailiff, take the prisoner into custody. 2 large court officers approached Thomas. They grabbed his arms, pulled them behind his back, and the harsh metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. It was a sound Thomas had inflicted on hundreds of people. Now it was the sound of his own life ending. As they led him toward the side door, Thomas stopped and looked over his shoulder. He locked eyes with Daniel Harrison one last time. Daniel did not gloat. He did not smile. He just looked at Thomas with the calm, steady gaze of a man who had done exactly what he promised to do. He had cleaned house. Thomas looked away, shoulders slumped, and was led into the holding cells, disappearing into the dark maw of the prison system. The next morning, Commissioner Daniel Harrison stood before the 12th Precinct bullpen once again. The room looked different now. Captain Miller had been forced into early retirement. Several other officers who had enabled the toxic culture had been reassigned or fired. The air felt lighter. The fear was gone, replaced by a cautious optimism. Standing beside Daniel at the podium was Hank Donovan. He looked uncomfortable in a suit, shifting his weight awkwardly. A police department cannot function as an occupying force, Daniel told the assembled officers. We are part of this community. When one of our own failed, spectacularly, a civilian, a man driving a truck in the middle of a storm, stepped up and did our job for us. He protected the vulnerable. Daniel turned and handed Hank a heavy glass plaque. On behalf of the Fairview Police Department and on behalf of my family, we award you the Citizen's Commendation for bravery. Thank you, Hank. The room erupted into genuine applause. The younger officers, like Greg Henderson, clapped the loudest. They were ready for a new era. They were ready to actually protect and serve. Daniel watched the applause, thinking of his daughter sleeping safely in her warm bed at home. The system was broken, yes, but it was not unfixable. It just required people who were willing to turn on the lights and face the ugly truths hiding in the dark. The cleanup of Fairview had just begun. But for the first time in a long time, the city was in good hands. True character is revealed in how we treat those we believe have no power. A badge, a title, or a position of authority is not a license for cruelty. It is a sacred trust. When arrogance and prejudice blind people to the humanity of others, the fall from grace is always devastating. Justice may sometimes be delayed, but the truth has a way of coming to light, proving that nobody is above the law.